Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle. Today we have with us Dudley Slater, who is the co-author with Stephen Taylor of Fusion Leadership, Unleashing the Movement of Monday Morning Enthusiasts. Welcome to the program, Dudley.
Hey, Mike. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Hey, so I love two words in that title, fusion, because that's a really fun-sounding word. I've used it many, many times, and it gives that connotation of we're bringing multiple things together. We're fusing things together. And then unleashing, wonderful power word. And then Monday morning enthusiast. I mean, who likes Monday mornings? And you hear the old stat that so many heart attacks happen on Sunday night because people are dreading Monday morning. So tell us a little bit about your book and what the focus is, how you're tying together leadership and having people looking forward to Monday.
Yeah, thank you. Delighted to. Well, you picked it up immediately. The idea behind Fusion Leadership is to, carefully examine the leadership behaviors that result in fusing people together around a shared mission or a cause. And in writing the book, I drew upon my own experiences as an entrepreneur, and I had the good fortune of going around the country and interviewing 8 other iconic, nationally recognized CEOs who shared with me their stories. And so the lessons draw upon that, with the fundamental objective being examining that question, what behaviors of the leader attract people to the mission, and how are those different from the behaviors that, drive people away from the organization.
And so, kind of like the old saying, success leaves clues. You go and interview people that are successful, and you're reporting back in the book of, your findings. And I just love that model. Let's talk a little bit more about your background, what led you to Fusion Leadership, and that whole concept, because I know you've got quite the storied past, but give us the Reader's Digest version and kind of set that stage in that platform.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very fortunate in that I guess I would describe my journey as one of an entrepreneur. I co-founded my own business called Integra Telecom and served as the CEO of that business for about 15 years, and was fortunate enough to see the business grow from a startup to national prominence. We became one of the 10 largest businesses in our industry, which was data networking and fiber optic network connectivity. And, growing from a startup to something large, employing over 2,000 people, I became fascinated by the question. And really, as an entrepreneur, I kind of hit that epiphany point that a lot of entrepreneurs do, which is, okay, I came up with the idea. I've got, the funding raised. I'm at the early stages of a growth trajectory. Oh my gosh, now I'm getting to the point where I realize I can't do all this myself. How in the world do I inspire others to embrace this vision and kind of take what I have come up with and take this really to the next level? And I found myself fixating on that question of how does one motivate others to fulfill a vision. And when you look at national statistics, and the Gallup organization does a great job of this every year, that report some 70% of American workers dread Monday morning and hate their jobs, implying they don't, they're not attached to the organization or the cause. That terrified me. And so I was really looking to understand, what is the difference? What is the behaviors of those leaders that are able to inspire people to the mission, and how is that different from the majority that seem to be clueless to this question and really, alienate people from the organization?
What was one, I know that your book would cover all of them, but what was one of the main traits and characteristics that you discovered that was one of those leadership characteristics that set them apart? Because I think anyone can say leadership, We follow, and it kind of gets a little trite. So what was something that stood out to you in your interviews?
Well, I would love to answer that question by sounding like some sort of really clever intellectual. However, that wasn't the case for me. I did my fair share of stumbling and bumbling through this, and what I learned is that, and I can give you some examples, but what I learned and what I was able to validate in talking to these 8 other national leaders is that people want to be, what inspires people is they want to be attached to a mission. They want to make a difference in society. And they want to show up on Monday morning because they feel like they're making a difference in their corner of the world. And so that led to the critical question, well, how do you do that? How do you behave in a way that inspires people to feel like they're making a difference versus driving them away? And it comes to answer your question, Mike. It comes down to one simple thing, and it's hard to do this every day. But that simple thing is, when you are a leader, you're constantly making decisions about the floor plan or compensation levels or who has the floor when you conduct meetings, and all these little daily decisions you make as a leader. Many of them tempt all of our needs to show off and to exert our ego and to reward ourselves with how clever and smart and magnanimous we are. And that is what drives people away. If you think about it, ask the simple question, would the average American worker rather work toward a cause, or would the average American worker rather work to empower and enrich and glorify their boss? And when you think about it that way, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean,
yeah.
So what I found is, as the leader, when you make those decisions, when you undertake your daily activity, if you can keep the mission forefront in your mind and put yourself, kind of check your own interests at the door, that's what makes the difference. And so I can give you examples, but at the risk of rambling on, that's how I would answer your question. That's at the core of this debate.
Rambling is great. I think I love just kind of having brainstorming, fireside chat type conversations, because that's where people learn. It's not a scripted, what led you to, thank you for your time. I love your thought process. One thing you said makes me think of something interesting, where making a difference in culture seems to be attributed to millennials, meaning, millennials are so different than, and they want to feel like they make a difference. Well, you're not talking about millennials. You're just talking about people. So what did you find? Was there any, demographic distinguishers in that? Or do you think that people are just kind of putting this tag on millennials, and while they say, sure, we want to make a difference, well, so does the 45-year-old, the 55-year-old, and the 65-year-old. What's really the difference? Why are we attributing that to one demographic over another?
I'm definitely in that latter category of your question, but I have 2 children, a wonderful son and daughter, who are square in the middle of the millennial generation, and I've had this conversation with them, and I think it's across lines of people. I think it's across generations, it's across ethnicity, I think it's across both sexes, and I believe that from a career standpoint, and I'm not talking about faith, I'm not talking about family, I'm talking about career. From a career standpoint, people want to feel like what they're doing with their life is meaningful. And so as the leader, we have a duty to help people find meaning in their work. And I believe, from my experience in talking to these other CEOs, that the way to help people find meaning is to connect them to the cause. And, it's great if you're, I'll give the example of a drug company where, you're potentially inventing a life-saving new drug. That's obviously very motivating. But look, we connected people to fiber optic networks, which sounds technically advanced and all that, and there's some of that in there. But at the end of the day, it's a little bit like a utility business, and so I think this this ability to connect people to meaning transcends for-profit, nonprofit, exciting businesses, boring businesses, growing businesses, shrinking businesses. And that's where I think it lies, is connecting people to that cause.
And don't you think that if you're the leader and you're trying to connect people to your cause, that you have to have that element of storytelling in there to make sure people are getting behind it? And when you were mentioning the drug company, let's say, the drug company could say to their, staff or their team, we're making this drug to help these people. Okay, that's not really much of a vision or a mission, but I think that when you can start infusing some things like, hey, let's talk about Martha. You think about how all the presidents do this, where it's like, and here's, Betty Johnson, and it kind of draws people into that story. Well, what if that drug company can say, look at, Mrs. Smith, this example, she wrote into us and she had this and it changed her life and it saved this and whatever the drug is supposed to be doing. And now people are going, oh yeah, we're not just, pulling the press, handle down on the press and making this pill come out on the other end. We're part of this mechanism that's changing lives. And, you can do the same thing with the telecom. Hey, there was a company that used to get their data this fast, and now because we've done the fiber optics, boom, they were this fast, and now that helped the 911 operator, respond to a call quicker, or whatever those examples could be. And I think that those tangible, really clear examples can help tell that story. Is that some of the things you've experienced as well?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question that the ability for the entrepreneur to articulate the vision is critical. I think, a lot of people will point to things like a, creative space, an open floor plan, having an inclusive work environment that, welcomes all people. Those types of things are important. But, if it was that easy, that you could just, have the right floor plan and have the right, HR policies. Look, we wouldn't have the statistic where 70% of our workers are disengaged and don't like to show up on Monday morning. The reason this is hard, the reason so many people fail at it, is because I think we as leaders get in our own way. And I'd love to share with you, if we can, maybe a couple examples to really underscore this.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
So I talk about this behavior of, where are you exhibiting, by your behaviors as the leader, are you sending the message to your people that you're all about the mission, or are you sending the message that you're all about yourself? And I would love to say that I was on the right side of that answer throughout my career, but I learned a few things along the way. And one example was we just raised what our local newspaper in Oregon called the largest growth financing in the state's history, $211 million of growth capital. And we were on a growth trajectory. I had a new board showing up, flying in from, New York and Boston and Texas, and I would connect these board meetings. And after one meeting, typically we would be, all of our executives would be on airplanes flying out of there. And we would be, as the team, kind of taking a sigh of relief and enjoying ourselves and kind of debriefing. And I went to my office and I was by myself. And all of a sudden, my chief operating officer and president comes storming in my office, red in the face, pounds the desk, and says, "Why do you always do that to him?" And I'm like, I was dumbfounded. Do what? What are you talking about?
Do what to who?
Yeah, do what to who? And he goes on to explain to me that one of our key executives is about ready to leave the company. And that shocked me because we were the envy of everybody. We'd just raised this growth capital. We were on a fast trajectory. This was a key executive on the team that had the chance to create a lot of personal wealth. Who would walk out of that situation? And yet I had one of my key team members about ready to leave. And so I was just shocked. And it took me weeks to process this. And of course, I could have just, flexed my muscle as the CEO and said, "Hey, it's my way or the highway." But the guy who came storming in my office and kind of literally smacked me in the face over my behavior was very smart, somebody I had a lot of respect for, and he got me thinking. And I came to realize that what I was doing in these meetings was I was cutting off this other executive as a question would get asked and this other executive would start to answer it, and I would interrupt him. And at the time, I felt he was a little too long-winded, and I could see my investors kind of glazing over a little bit. And I felt like, hey, I'm the CEO. It's my job to control the flow of this meeting. And that's all true. CEO doesn't need to be in charge. But I as a result of this confrontation, weeks later, I learned there was another sneaky little culprit that crept into my thought process, and that was I was needing to show these big shot new investors that I was in charge. I had the need to demonstrate that I was the smartest guy in the room. I was insecure, and we just raised this big financing, and I felt like, I got to establish myself here with this new board. And what I realized in those behaviors was, by behaving that way, I was sending the signal to this key executive that I didn't trust him, that I didn't value his contribution or his comments to the board. And that was exactly the opposite message of how I thought about this key executive. I in fact, had enormous trust in him. And so the point is, this wasn't a case of me driving a wedge in my team because I was dishonest or failed to articulate a vision or had any sort of lack of moral integrity. It was more the subtle nuance of my own ego needs interfering with what was best for the company. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that, and I made a slight change in my behavior, this guy came back into the orbit of our team and ended up retiring from the company, years later, and did great things for us. And so the point I'm making is what attracts people to the mission is when the leader exhibits that they're committed to the mission themselves. Mm-hmm. And the moment the leader undertakes a behavior that leads people to conclude that they're really just trying to inflate themselves or enrich themselves or empower themselves, that drives people away. And these behaviors show up in the questions of, how do you set compensation? They show up in the question of, how do you conduct meetings? One of my favorite ones is they show up in the question of, where do you prioritize your time? A lot of leaders, have very full calendars, and they love to surround themselves with other executives and investors and Wall Street analysts and all these smart, highly educated people. Well, that, in my opinion, is wrong. When you do that and you fail to set time aside for the front, for the people who are actually doing the work, the frontline workers, you're unintentionally sending the message that, my frontline workers aren't important to me, or the work they do doesn't matter to me. So again, and that's where I was challenged a little bit, and then another brief story. But I learned as I matured in my leadership style to set aside a couple hours every day and do this every week and every month, where I would walk the floor, I would get out there and talk to the people doing the work, and I would ask the question, what can we do better as a company to differentiate ourselves and to really execute on our. So this is where the distinction lies. It's in the behavior of the leader and answering the question: are your behaviors attracting people to the cause, because that's inspiring, or are they driving people away from the cause, which is enormously deflating?
I love it, and I love your example. That last example there was very transparent and authentic in showing a potential flaw that you had, but you fortunately learned or were made aware of it and prevented something negative from happening. So I love those examples, and I'm sure there's plenty throughout your book from lessons from all your interviews and corporate experience. So I would like to just ask, how can people connect with you, your website, and purchase a copy of your book?
Thank you. The best way to access the whole Fusion Leadership journey is through the website, and the website is fusionleadership.org, fusionleadership.org. And the book's available, through the major bricks and mortar stores. It's available through all the major online stores, and it's also available directly from the website.
Excellent. Well, Dudley, thank you so much for your time. I love getting to know you. I love your approach and your concepts, and wish you all the best.
Hey, Mike, thank you. It's been a delight, and really appreciate the discussion we've shared.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.